They mocked the poor old lady next door until she revealed who she really was. And I was right there, living across the street, watching every moment unfold. The neighbors whispering, the frail image of Eleanor, my first impression of Cedar Falls, and how people seemed obsessed with tearing her down. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone judged unfairly in your neighborhood? Would you believe gossip like that, or would you wait for the truth? Drop your answer below. Eleanor neighbor responds. She walks by calmly, but I notice how her shoulders tighten when they laugh. The way Eleanor disappears on certain evenings, how she shops late at night, the looks she gets. At a PTA meeting, Tanya makes a cutting remark. If only Eleanor would fix up her place, our property values wouldn't suffer. Eleanor looks down and doesn't argue. I sense there's more to her, but I can't prove it yet. What would you have done if you saw your neighbor treated like this? Speak up or stay quiet. Late one night, I glance across the street and see Eleanor carrying a heavy locked trunk into her basement. She struggles with it, but her face looks determined, not frail. I wonder, what could a woman like her possibly be hiding in there? That locked trunk changed everything. From that night on, nobody in Cedar Falls, Ohio would ever see Eleanor the same way again. Subscribe before the next twist catches you off guard, because you won't believe what came next. They mocked the poor old lady next door until she revealed who she really was, and I was standing right there watching it all from across the street. What she carried into her basement that night still keeps me awake. I want you to think about your own neighborhood for a second. You know that one house, the one people gossip about when they think no one's listening? In Cedar Falls, Ohio, that house belonged to Eleanor Briggs. To most of my neighbors, she wasn't Eleanor, she was just the poor old lady. They'd point at her faded coat, her rusted car, and her quiet walks home from the corner store. And they'd laugh. At barbecues and school events, I'd hear the same whispers. She probably lives off food stamps. Her place is an eyesore. Someone should call the city on her. The cruel part, she never defended herself. She'd keep her head down, carry her grocery bags, and slip back into her tiny, weather-beaten house at the end of the block. And the more she ignored them, the bolder the mockery became. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen someone judged unfairly in your neighborhood? Someone people treated as less because of how they looked or where they lived. What none of us realized then was that Eleanor carried secrets big enough to shake every person on that street. And the first clue, I saw it with my own eyes one late night.
Quick question for you watching this. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have stood up to neighbors like Tanya and the Carters? Or would you have stayed quiet to keep the peace? Drop your answer in the comments. I'm curious how many of you would have had the courage I didn't. The gossip about Eleanor wasn't just talk. It spread like wildfire through every corner of Cedar Falls, at football games, at the diner off Main Street, even whispered in the church pews. And with every story they told about her, the legend of the poor old lady grew bigger, meaner, and more exaggerated. Still, Eleanor never snapped, never shouted, never defended herself. She let the storm roll over her, silent and steady. And that silence, it only made people gossip more. What none of us realized then was that Eleanor wasn't silent because she was weak. She was silent because she was waiting. Things in Cedar Falls didn't stay the same after that warning. It was like Eleanor's words carried some kind of weight. Because within days, the people who mocked her most started to feel the ground shift beneath them. And none of us were ready for what followed. The first domino to fall was Tanya's own household. Her husband, Richard, had worked at the local bank for nearly 15 years. He was steady, respected, the kind of guy people thought had nothing to worry about. Then, out of nowhere, the news broke. He'd been let go. Downsizing, the bank claimed. But people whispered that it was tied to something else, an internal review. Tanya tried to spin it. "We'll be fine," she told anyone who would listen at the diner. "We've got savings." But her face told another story. Panic. Humiliation. And here's the part that got people talking. 2 days after Richard was fired, I saw Eleanor walking home with a stack of envelopes under her arm. She didn't look upset. She looked purposeful. Let me ask you, do you believe in coincidences, or do you think sometimes the universe gives people exactly what they've earned? Drop your take in the comments. I want to know where you stand. Next came Denise Carter. She was the kind of neighbor who smiled big for the world, but sharpened her words behind closed doors. She and her husband Mark had bought a shiny new SUV, bragged about their remodel, and flaunted their vacations to anyone who'd listen. Then one morning, she found an envelope taped to her front door. No name, no return address, just a single sheet of paper inside. It was a copy of her overdue credit card bill. Thousands of dollars in debt. Interest piling high. The whispers spread faster than wildfire. Did you hear? Denise is drowning in debt? Her perfect image cracked overnight. She stopped showing up to events. Even Mark looked embarrassed, his confident smile slipping when anyone mentioned money. And here's the part that got people talking. 2 days after Mark was fired, I saw Eleanor walking home with a stack of envelopes under her arm. She didn't look upset. She looked purposeful. It didn't take long for the mood on our block to change. People who had laughed the loudest suddenly fell quiet when Eleanor passed. Tanya stopped live streaming her insults. Denise pulled her curtains tighter. Even the teenagers seemed to hesitate before stepping foot near Eleanor's yard. It was as if an invisible shift had taken place. But with that shift came something else. Suspicion. Whispers floated around the neighborhood. How does Eleanor know so much? What is she hiding in that house? Maybe she's connected to somebody powerful. The gossip changed tone. It wasn't just cruel anymore. It was fearful. I'll admit it. I was just as curious as everyone else. I started watching Eleanor closer. Her patterns, her comings and goings. She walked to Donnelly's Market, picked up her groceries, and went straight home. She mowed her own lawn, kept her porch swept, and never asked anyone for help. But there were moments that didn't fit. Like the time I saw a black sedan parked outside her house late at night. A man in a suit stepped out, knocked once, and Eleanor let him inside without hesitation. 20 minutes later, he left, carrying what looked like a sealed folder. Or the time I spotted her at the post office mailing a thick envelope with a label that read Columbus. Each sighting pushed my curiosity higher. Something about her life didn't add up, and I couldn't let it go. It wasn't me who uncovered the truth first. It was Mark Carter. He'd been restless since Denise's debts were exposed, and he blamed Eleanor. He swore she had something to do with it. So one night, he decided to follow her. He told me later how it happened. She left her house just after sunset, dressed more neatly than usual. Not the frayed cardigan, but a crisp blouse tucked into slacks. Mark trailed behind, headlights off, keeping distance as she drove to Columbus. She pulled up to a luxury hotel downtown. Not a chain motel, not a budget inn. A place where the valet rushed forward to open her door.
After the night Eleanor walked into that luxury hotel like she owned the place, nothing on our block felt the same. People stopped mocking her, but they didn't stop watching. And the more we watched, the more questions we had, until a stormy night peeled back a piece of her past we never expected. It started with an innocent conversation. I was at the Cedar Falls Public Library flipping through local history books when Mrs. Holloway, the head librarian, a woman who had lived in town forever, asked me what I was researching. I hesitated before blurting out, "Do you know much about Eleanor Briggs?" Her face changed, not in a dramatic way, but in that subtle tightening people do when a memory resurfaces. "Eleanor Briggs?" she whispered, glancing around to make sure no one was listening. "I haven't heard that name in years." She led me to the archives section, pulled out a box of old newspapers, and set it on the table. "You didn't hear this from me," she said. "But I remember her from a long time ago, not as Eleanor. Back then, she went by her maiden name, Eleanor Whitaker." The clippings she showed me weren't from Cedar Falls. They were from New York City, late 1980s. There she was, younger but unmistakably her. Headlines read, "Whitaker named youngest vice president at global firm," and "Eleanor Whitaker shakes up corporate boardroom." I stared at those photos, at the confident woman in tailored suits standing alongside men twice her age. This wasn't some frail recluse. This was a woman who once commanded boardrooms. Mrs. Holloway topped one clipping and lowered her voice. She left it all, walked away. Rumor was betrayal. My pulse quickened. What could drive a woman from power and wealth to a quiet street in Cedar Falls? News like that doesn't stay hidden long in a town like ours. Within days, the story leaked into casual conversations. At Marlin's Diner, over coffee and pancakes, I heard Tanya whispering to Denise Carter. Apparently, she used to run some big company in New York. Can you believe that? Denise, still nursing her wounded pride from her debt exposure, scoffed. If that's true, she must have lost it all. Nobody ends up here by choice. But their tones were different now. The cruel edge was gone, replaced with a nervous curiosity. Everyone wanted to know what really happened to Eleanor Briggs. I decided to watch closer. One evening at Donnelly's Market, I saw her checking out at the register. She paid in cash, as always, but when she pulled her wallet open, I glimpsed something odd. An old business card tucked into the sleeve. I couldn't see the full text, but I caught enough. Whitaker Holdings, Manhattan. Her hand trembled slightly as she tucked it back. Not from weakness, but from caution, like she didn't want anyone to see. That was when I knew her past wasn't gone. It was right there, folded into her daily life, no matter how much she tried to hide it. Then came the storm. It was a muggy August night when the sky split open. Thunder cracked over Cedar Falls, rain hammered rooftops, and the power grid gave out block by block. I sat in darkness on my porch listening to the storm rage. Across the street, every house was blacked out. Except one. Eleanor's. A faint golden glow spilled through her curtains. Not the flicker of a candle, not the buzz of a flashlight. It was steady. Electrical. My heart pounded. How was her house still lit when the rest of us were sitting in the dark? Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my raincoat and crossed the street under the downpour, pretending to check my gutters, but really angling toward her window. Through the sheer fabric of the curtain, I saw movement. Silhouettes. Not just Eleanor's frail frame. Taller figures. At least two of them, shifting around the room. They weren't neighbors. No one else dared venture out in that storm. One figure handed her what looked like a folder. Another gestured as if explaining something. Eleanor stood straight. No cardigan now. Just a crisp blouse, her posture sharp and commanding. I stumbled back, soaked, adrenaline coursing through me. Why did she have power when we didn't? And who were those people inside her house at midnight during a blackout? Back in my own dark living room, I couldn't rest. The storm pounded on, but my mind was louder. Every rumor, every whisper, every sighting added up to one conclusion. Eleanor Briggs wasn't a frail old woman living out her days. She was someone else entirely. And that trunk I'd seen her dragging into her basement, I became certain it was tied to this double life. By the time the storm passed, the whispers about Eleanor had become something bigger. Our neighborhood wasn't united anymore. It was divided. Some people feared her, others envied her, and a few were desperate to destroy her. And that division would crack wide open the night her voice, calm, perfect, flawless, spoke a language none of us expected. They mocked her, they feared her, and then they watched her in silence. But the night Tanya Miller finally confronted Eleanor Briggs in front of the entire neighborhood, that was the night Cedar Falls learned what real power looks like. And it all started in the most ordinary place, our community meeting. Once a month, the homeowners of Cedar Falls gathered in the basement of First Baptist Church. Normally, it was boring stuff: budget reports, sidewalk repairs, bake sale schedules. But that night, the seats filled early. Everyone knew why. Eleanor was there. She sat in the back row, her cardigan folded neatly over her lap. No notes, no clipboard, no agenda. Just her eyes scanning the room, watching, waiting. And Tanya? She was pacing near the front like a prosecutor waiting for her witness. Her phone was in her pocket, full of recordings, photos, and the stories she'd been itching to tell. The meeting started with the usual chatter, but no one cared about playground repairs. They were waiting for Tanya to pounce. It didn't take long. She stood abruptly, her voice sharp and rehearsed. "I have a question for our dear neighbor Eleanor," Tanya said, turning toward the back row. "Why does a woman who claims to live like one of us have the money to make six-figure donations in Cincinnati? Why does she take calls in French? Who exactly are you?" The room buzzed. Some gasps, some murmurs, a few nervous chuckles. Eleanor didn't move, didn't blink. Tanya pressed on, waving her phone. "I have proof of her secrets, and I think we deserve answers right here, right now." I could feel the tension rising like static. People leaned forward, waiting for Eleanor to finally crack. But she didn't. She simply set her cardigan on the chair and rose slowly to her feet. Her voice carried without effort. "If answers is what you want, then answers you'll get. But not here, not in whispers, not with cameras pointed from bushes. You want the truth? Come to my home this Friday, all of you, and I'll open the door myself." The room fell silent. Pastor Morgan cleared his throat. "Ms. Briggs, are you sure?" She nodded once. "Yes, but only if you all come." Her gaze swept the room, steady, unshaken. Then she sat back down as if the matter was closed. Tanya sputtered, caught off guard. She wanted a fight, a scene, but Eleanor had turned it into an invitation. And now the entire neighborhood had 3 days to stew on what awaited us in that house. Those 3 days felt like weeks. At the diner, speculation ran wild. She's a spy. She's a criminal. She's rich. She's dangerous. Some swore they wouldn't go. Too risky. Others couldn't stay away, desperate for answers. And me? I felt torn. Part of me feared what might come out. Another part couldn't resist knowing the truth. Here, let me ask you, if your neighbor invited the entire street into our house after months of secrets, would you go? Or would you stay home and pretend you weren't curious? Drop your choice in the comments. By Friday evening, every porch light flicked on as neighbors filed toward Eleanor's house. I'd never seen so many people on our block at once. Families brought lawn chairs, some carried notebooks, others clutched coffee like they were attending a trial. Eleanor opened her door without a word. She wore a navy dress, simple but sharp, her silver hair pinned neatly. She looked nothing like the frail woman from months ago. Inside, her living room was spotless. A bookshelf lined with old volumes, a lamp glowing warmly in the corner, and in the center of the room, that same locked trunk. The sight of it made my pulse race. We all took our seats. The air was thick, like the seconds before a verdict. Tanya couldn't help herself. "Well, are you going to tell us, or do we have to guess what's in that trunk?" Eleanor didn't snap, didn't flinch. She simply placed her hand on the trunk and looked around the room. "For months, you've called me poor, mocked my clothes, judged my silence. You thought you knew me. Tonight, you'll see who I am and who I was." She reached for a key. The metal scraped as it entered the lock. I leaned forward, breath shallow. This was it, the moment the mask would finally fall. The padlock clicked open, the hinges groaned as she lifted the lid. But before anyone could see what was inside, Eleanor looked up, her eyes steady as stone. "You wanted the truth. Be careful, because once you see it, you can't unsee it." Gasps filled the room. Some people gripped their spouses' hands. Tanya's phone trembled in her grasp. And me? I felt frozen, knowing our neighborhood was about to change forever. Now tell me, what do you think Eleanor kept hidden in that trunk all these years? Documents? Money? Proof of a secret life? Drop your guesses in the comments. I'll be watching. That night, as the trunk creaked open, our neighborhood teetered on the edge of a revelation, and what Eleanor revealed next would rewrite everything we thought we knew about her. Don't miss it. Subscribe to Voices of Auntie Grace right now, because Chapter 7 holds the twist that shook Cedar Falls to its core.
The night Eleanor Briggs opened that trunk was the night Cedar Falls changed forever. For months, we mocked her, whispered about her, feared her, but none of us expected what she revealed. And I promise you this, once I saw what was inside, I could never look at her, or myself, the same way again. When the padlock snapped open, you could feel the room tense. The trunk groaned as the lid lifted, every hinge echoing louder than thunder. We leaned forward, eyes wide, breaths caught. Tanya raised her phone, recording. Denise clutched Mark's arm like she was bracing for a bomb. Eleanor didn't flinch. She reached inside with deliberate calm and lifted the first object into the light. It wasn't money, it wasn't jewels, it was a medal. A heavy bronze disc, the ribbon faded but intact. She held it up for all to see, her expression unreadable. "Presidential Medal of Freedom," she said quietly. Gasps erupted. Some neighbors laughed nervously, thinking it was fake. Others just stared. Then she set the medal down and pulled out a thick folder stamped with words that made my stomach lurch. Classified. Eleanor spoke without drama, her voice steady as if she'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. "I wasn't always the woman you see now. I wasn't always Eleanor Briggs, the poor old lady in the gray house. Decades ago, I was Eleanor Whitaker, and my job wasn't baking pies or tending gardens. My job was intelligence. Counterintelligence, to be exact." The room erupted again. Some gasps, some disbelief. Tanya muttered, "She's lying." But Eleanor ignored her. She opened the folder, flipping past photographs, coded documents, sealed memos. Black bars crossed out names, but some were left untouched. Ambassadors, CEOs, even government officials. I worked cases you've read about in history books. Cases you thought were solved by someone else. My team cracked codes, uncovered plots, and stopped things you'll never know happened. And when betrayal came from inside my own circle, I left. I chose obscurity. I chose Cedar Falls. She looked at Tanya then, directly, like a teacher staring down a student. I chose silence because the truth has weight, and most people aren't strong enough to carry it. Her words split the room in half. Some neighbors sat stunned, mouths open, whispering, "She's telling the truth." Miguel nodded slowly, his eyes full of respect. Others, like Tanya, scoffed. "So what, you expect us to believe you're some kind of secret agent?" Eleanor didn't answer with words. She reached back into the trunk and pulled out a framed photo. A younger Eleanor, hair darker, standing beside a president in the White House, shaking hands. The signature scrolled across the bottom read, "With gratitude, R." Silence fell like a blanket. Even Tanya's phone lowered slightly. I couldn't breathe. This woman I'd seen sweeping her porch, shopping at Donnelly's Market, mocked for her clothes. She'd once walked the halls of power. She'd once shaped history in ways we couldn't imagine. And I was ashamed. Ashamed of every time I stayed silent while others mocked her. Ashamed that I believed her quiet meant weakness, when in truth it meant control. Tell me honestly, if your neighbor revealed something like this, would you believe them right away, or would you need more proof? Comment below. I want to know where you'd stand that night. But Tanya wasn't done. She rose to her feet, pointing at Eleanor like an accuser. "You're making this up. Those could be fakes. Anyone can print photos, buy medals online, stamp papers. You're just a fraud who tricked us." Her voice trembled, though, not with confidence, but with fear. Eleanor's reply was quiet, almost pitying. "You think this is about proof? You think I kept all of this locked away to impress you? No, Tanya, this is about survival. These papers, these memories, they're the reason I live quietly. Because even now, there are people who would rather see me erased than remembered." And then came the part that froze us all. Eleanor reached into the trunk again and pulled out a sealed envelope. On the front, in neat cursive, was a name. Mark Carter. Mark's face drained of color. Denise whispered, "What is that?" Eleanor held it up. "This letter was given to me years ago. It contains records of your grandfather's dealings with a company tied to my work. He wasn't just a businessman, Mark. He was the one who orchestrated the betrayal that forced me out. The money that built your family's fortune was taken from my sacrifice." Gasps rippled through the room. Mark shook his head violently. "That's not true." But Eleanor's eyes didn't waver. "It is. And the irony? You mocked me while living off the wealth stolen from my sacrifice." The room was dead silent. You could hear Tanya's phone buzzing from a text in her pocket. Mark sat down, pale and shaking. Denise buried her face in her hands. The neighbors exchanged looks, some horrified, others oddly relieved. For months, they'd painted Eleanor as powerless. Now, they saw she held secrets that could destroy reputations, topple legacies. Miguel spoke up softly. "Why tell us this now?" Eleanor closed the trunk slowly. "Because lies don't stay buried forever, and because your cruelty woke something I tried to put to rest. You demanded the truth. Now you'll live with it." Her words cut deeper than any insult Tanya had ever thrown. That night, long after the meeting ended, I sat on my porch replaying every moment. The medal, the photos, the envelope with Mark's name. I realized Cedar Falls wasn't just a quiet town anymore. It was a stage, and Eleanor Briggs had been forced back into the spotlight. Quick question for you. Would you feel safer knowing a neighbor like Eleanor had once protected the country, or would that terrify you even more? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The next morning, I saw her retrieve the mail. She paused at the curb, flipped through the envelopes, and stopped at one. Her face went pale. She clutched it tightly, walked inside, and shut the door. Hours later, smoke curled from her chimney as if she'd burned something, but I caught a glimpse before she destroyed it. A single, chilling line at the bottom of the letter. "We found you. It's time." My blood ran cold, because for the first time, it wasn't about us mocking her. It wasn't about Cedar Falls at all. It was about whoever had been waiting, watching, and finally closing in. Eleanor revealed her past, her medals, her secrets, and the betrayal tied to our own neighbors. But that letter, "We found you, it's time," that changed everything. You don't want to miss what happens when her past comes roaring back. Subscribe to Voices of Auntie Grace right now, because Chapter 8 is where her silence finally breaks into a storm. After Eleanor revealed who she truly was, Cedar Falls could never go back to normal. The woman we mocked, ignored, and underestimated was now the center of every conversation. But even as neighbors scrambled to treat her with respect, the letter that arrived in her mailbox whispered a darker truth. Her past wasn't finished with her. The days after the meeting felt strange, like we were all walking on new ground. Eleanor's name was no longer a punchline. People who once laughed at her now crossed the street just to greet her politely. Denise sent over a basket of muffins. Miguel offered to repair her fence for free. Even the kids, once cruel, suddenly walked with their heads down whenever she passed. It was respect, mixed with guilt. But Eleanor didn't soak it up. She carried herself the same as always, head high, cardigan buttoned, moving with deliberate calm. Only now, instead of whispers of mockery,
She walked through whispers of awe. Let me ask you, have you ever seen a community flip like that? From hate to respect almost overnight? Comment below if you've witnessed it. It's chilling to watch in real life. The most shocking turn came from Tanya. One morning, she showed up on Eleanor's porch holding a bouquet of flowers. I watched from across the street as she fidgeted, twisting the stems nervously. When Eleanor opened the door, Tanya's voice cracked. She said, "I'm sorry for all of it. I didn't know who you were." Eleanor didn't smile. She didn't reach for the flowers. She simply looked Tanya in the eye and said, "You never needed to know who I was. You only needed to treat me with decency." Then she closed the door gently, leaving Tanya standing there, red-faced, clutching her apology. For a brief moment, it felt like things might settle. People left meals on Eleanor's porch, the Carters trimmed her lawn. Pastor Morgan stopped by often, sometimes just to sit with her on the porch in silence. But I couldn't shake the image of that letter. "We found you. It's time." Eleanor burned it, yes, but the fear in her eyes that morning wasn't something you could erase with fire. And though she walked tall, I noticed changes. She kept her curtains closed tighter. She double-locked her doors. Sometimes at night, I'd see her light on at 2 a.m., shadows moving across the walls as though she were pacing. One evening, as dusk settled, a black SUV rolled slowly down Cedar Falls. It didn't belong. Too new. Too polished. It passed Eleanor's house once, then again. On the third pass, it stopped at the corner. The windows were too tinted to see inside. The engine idled for a long minute before it finally pulled away. I stood frozen on my porch, heart pounding in my chest. Eleanor never came outside, but the next morning I noticed new security cameras mounted on her porch and a reinforced lock on her basement door. I couldn't take the silence anymore. That week, I crossed the street and knocked on her door. She opened it slowly, eyes sharp. "I saw the SUV," I said quietly. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "They're watching. They've been watching for years. But now, they're closer." I swallowed hard. "Who are they?" Her answer chilled me. People who don't want the truth remembered, and they won't stop until I'm gone. She didn't say more. She didn't need to. A few nights later, smoke rose again from Eleanor's chimney. This time, it wasn't just one letter. It was stacks of papers. Files, photos, folders. She was burning her past piece by piece. Neighbors gathered quietly on porches, watching the smoke curl into the night sky. Nobody said a word. We all knew what it meant. She wasn't trying to hide from us anymore. She was trying to protect herself from whoever was coming. Let me ask you, if you had secrets powerful enough to threaten your life, would you destroy them to stay safe, or would you hold on, no matter the cost? Tell me what you'd do. I'm curious how you'd survive. The last time I saw Eleanor before everything changed, she was standing in her yard at dawn. She held that sapphire ring she always wore, turning it slowly in the morning light. When she noticed me watching, she slipped it back on and gave me the faintest nod. It felt less like a greeting, more like a goodbye. Later that night, another envelope arrived in her mailbox. She didn't burn this one. She read it, folded it carefully, and placed it inside the trunk before locking it again. Hours later, the black SUV returned. This time, it didn't circle. It was parked at the curb. I watched from my window, heart hammering in my chest. Two men stepped out. Dark suits, crisp movements. They walked toward her door. Eleanor didn't panic. She opened the door before they could knock. And without a word, she let them inside. The door shut, and that's where the story ended for me. Because from that night on, Eleanor Briggs was never seen in Cedar Falls again. Now I want your take. What do you think happened when those men stepped into Eleanor's house? Did she go willingly? Was she taken? Or did she have one final plan? Comment below. I want to hear your theories. The poor old lady we mocked was never poor, never weak, and never ordinary. But the night the black SUV stopped at her door, Cedar Falls lost her forever. Her story isn't finished, and neither is ours. Subscribe to Voices of Auntie Grace right now because you don't want to miss the stories that remind us you never really know who lives next door.